taking up your normal meditation posture. Allowing yourself a moment to tune into the body, noticing any sensations, noticing the breath, bring attention if you can. Allowing yourself to relax. And when you're ready, begin to imagine you are stood or seated in a very quiet, safe street. It feels familiar, you're very relaxed. The air is pleasant. There's a slight breeze in some trees that you can see in the peripheral of your vision or hear. You feel very comfortable. Perhaps somebody who normally goes out with you is with you. Maybe you're stood on your own. You recall that you're on your way to somewhere pleasant, and you're moving down the street at your regular pace in your body. There's a little traffic, just the occasional car passing you by. Coming towards you, you sense somebody is approaching. You see a familiar face or hear a familiar voice. It's your neighbor. They say hello, maybe they wave, and you smile and pass them by in the street. And you continue on your way. You reach the corner of the road It's a busy crossroads. The street ahead is quite busy. You can smell car fumes. Cars are idling. You sense the traffic lights must be red. The houses give way to shops. You stand or sit on the corner for a moment, absorbing the scene. You are in no hurry. To your right, there's a restaurant. It's a familiar local, one you have been to before. There are tables out in the street. You can hear the conversation from the people. Maybe you can see them. Other people are passing on the pavement in front. It's a pleasant scene and you feel quite relaxed. When you're ready, you move round the corner, along the street, past more shops. Some of them are fruit vendors. The fruit and veg is piled high on carts that come out into the pavement. People are passing you on the street. It's not too busy, but there are people you don't recognize. You hear strange voices. You will pass more shops, restaurants, a nail salon. At the end of the row of shops, there's a large billboard, the kind that revolves with several different adverts on. There's a large green tree next to it. You can hear the leaves in the wind. The first advert that you see is for women's deodorant. Doesn't particularly interest you. There are a number of women with their bodies in plain white underwear, standing around. They're smiling and looking quite happy. You press the button for the traffic lights and wait to cross. Somebody comes up alongside you to wait alongside you, waiting for the green man. The advert changes. It's a lingerie advert. There are several people. They're arranged in different poses, trying to make the lingerie look seductive. The green man changes. You hear the beep and cross the road. You continue to walk over the road, reaching the other side and turning right. This section is much quieter. There are fewer pedestrians, and you turn left through a familiar gap in the hedge into the park. Immediately, you walk through the gap in the trees and the traffic noise fades behind you, blocked by the tall hedges. You're in a very different space. You feel the warmth of the sun on your face. You hear the sound of children playing. As you move through the park, you see couples on benches, holding hands, kissing. You see elderly people walking along. Perhaps they've got a dog. There are people coming towards you and overtaking you on the wide path, some in groups, 2s, 3s, 4s. You approach a children's playground and you see them moving around over the bouncy tarmac. They seem happy. Watchful groups of parents stand by. On the roundabout next to it, teenagers sit, looking perhaps a little bit sulky. You hear snatches of conversation from people as they pass you. Eventually, you reach the bench where you're meeting your friend. They smile and greet you. So now just coming back into the room, making contact with your body, noticing the contact with the floor or the chair. The temperature of the air, the breath. So thank you for coming on that little journey with me. It's probably not quite what you had in mind when you came to the Buddha Center on a cold, rainy evening in November, that you'd be in a sunny park. But there we go. So just to help us get a sense of what everybody experienced, I'm going to need a little bit of help from Matty. If you're online, I'm going to ask some questions. If you could just raise your hand online, either electronically or by waving. And if you're in the room, just put your hand up. So just think back to what you've imagined, this imaginary world. How many people here saw people of color in their imaginary world? Just raise your hand if you think you saw people of color. Okay, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Okay, so that's about 10 people in total. So that's about a third of us saw people of color in the imaginary world we constructed. And how many of you saw same-sex couples or couples who weren't heterosexual couples? Hands up. So 2. One person. So that's 3 people. So that's less than 10% of the people of us participating that saw them in our imaginary world. And how many people saw people using a visible mobility aid of some sort? So that's a wheelchair or a walking stick or a crutch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 5. So that's 12. So that's slightly better. And how many people saw somebody who has a limb difference or a facial difference of some sort? So that's, you might be thinking of people who've had amputations, that sort of thing. Two, I think. So 2, okay, 2 people saw that. Did anyone hear anyone speaking a different language? So 1, 2, when I say a different language, I mean not English. So 1, 2, 3. 3. So 3, so 6 people, 6 of us saw that. Anyone wearing traditional cultural dress that's not sort of a traditional Western dress? So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. So that's 5 people, 5 of us saw that. And how many people saw somebody using an electric wheelchair?
Well,
okay, so 2 people. So verses 1 and 2 of the Dhammapada tell us that experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. As Buddhists, I'd hope that we might have come across this teaching before, that we create our world with our minds. And as conditioned beings, we are really, really heavily influenced to think about the world from our own points of view. I'd also hope we'd know that the human experience is rich, broad, beautiful, and diverse. And that we're better for it, we're better for this diversity. But I think this exercise shows us that sometimes we accidentally leave out groups of people. We accidentally leave out other people, people that aren't like us. And we perhaps overrepresent our perspective in the world. It's very human, but it does mean we are missing out on some of the potential beauty that there is to be seen. But what does that really have to do with Buddhist practice in the everyday? And why should we care about disability specifically? Why is that relevant as Buddhists? So Buddhism is about rooting out greed, hatred, and delusion. It's about noticing what we crave, what we want to push our way, and our views about the world. It is arguably about cultivating loving kindness for all beings, seeing deeply into the interconnected nature of reality, and trying our best to live in accordance with that reality as much as possible. We are hindered by this. We're hindered in this endeavor by our wrong views about ourselves, about our bodies, about the other bodies out there, and about the world. I really, truly believe that we cannot live in accordance with reality if we continually restrict ourselves to think about the world only from our perspective. We need to make space in our minds and hearts for other perspectives, for other views, even those people that are very different to us. And sometimes I can really feel my own resistance to this. For example, when my dad starts telling me about a very different political view he holds, and I can feel that tightness in my chest and real resistance, which is great. Like, it really is, because it tells me where my ego clinging is happening, where I'm holding on to a tight, rigid view. And ultimately, we as Buddhists, I'm hoping that we are aspiring to transcend views, to move beyond them. And until we get to that point, to hold loosely to the ones we do have, and to try to subtly refine them and replace them with better views. So I hope that all of the evenings in this series will help us move towards that a tiny bit, and hopefully help us to loosen our sense of self and other, maybe just a tiny bit. But I really invite you to notice where you're feeling that sort of sense of rigidity or that sense of resistance to anything you hear tonight or on any of the other nights. And in fact, actually just in your daily life, because it's really valuable. I'd also invite you, this is a little pitch for myself here, to when you're thinking about planning events or activities or commissioning a service or planning a gathering or meeting up with a friend, to think about people that aren't like you and how they might do that. Often I or my disabled friends are accidentally excluded from spaces or events or offered poor alternatives because we weren't considered from the beginning. Information about accessibility can often be hard to find, and sometimes just basic information about what an event isn't easily available. For example, a night, I probably won't really enjoy participating in an evening that involves lots of walking meditation. if I can't check out online that the event's suitable, and I have to expend a lot of my very limited and precious energy as a disabled person in working out if I even can be included, I've already been unintentionally disadvantaged by a group of very well-meaning people who want to run a very helpful, very supportive spiritual event, who just forgot that people with mobility issues exist. So first things first, really, I suppose. Language. So who would feel, and I'm not going to ask you to, but hands up, who would feel confident actually defining disability? Who feels like they actually know what disability means or what it is? I'm not going to ask you to share that, but just put a hand up if you think you could take a stab at it. One person, two, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Okay, cool.
5 or 6.
5 or 6. Okay, so less than a third of the people here. So what is it? So we're like, half an hour into the evening. Some of you might be wondering, when is she going to get to the point? Depending on where you take the stats from, 15 to 20% of adults in this country live with a disability. And it's about 1 billion people worldwide, probably a little bit more now, given the rate our population is growing. So definitions for disability are as broad and diverse as disabled people. But in the UK, in law, disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do day-to-day activities. And disabled people might include people, if they identify even with the term disability, people who have chronic illness, injury, genetic conditions, mental health conditions, neurodivergence, and a huge number of other factors. A lot of disabilities are invisible, so you can't tell just by looking at someone. And this one, I don't really know what to expect, but hands up if you've kind of wondered if the word disability or disabled is politically correct, or if you feel a little bit uncomfortable about the word disabled, or if you're kind of wondering if you should be using a different word like specially abled or special needs or differently abled. Just a little show of hands if you're kind of not sure about it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
5.
Okay, so just less than half. So that's very, very normal. A lot of people have a lot of uncertainty around what they should and shouldn't say, and a lot of anxiety about it. So for anyone who's not familiar with the language around disability, there's often a preference for how disabled people wish to be identified. For example, I personally strongly prefer the term disabled person as opposed to person with a disability. And that's because in my case, I feel that my chronic illness and disability are a very important part of who I am and how I experience the world. I can't separate my experience from my body. There isn't a separate me outside of this disabled body. In fact, as a Buddhist, I know there isn't really a separate me at all. But some people prefer the term person with a disability because they do think of themselves as being quite separate from their disabled identity, existing as a distinct person outside of it. Some people have negative connotations with the word disability. Some people don't really care. I fully respect the right of other disabled people to use language that reflects their experience, and it might be different to mine. In my case, the desire to divorce my identity from disability feels rooted in ableism, though, which was really important for me to identify. This core idea that disability is somehow bad or less than or something to push away or be ashamed of. I can see, though, that for other people, this might not be true. And as Buddhists, allowing other human beings to be different to us, without trying to prescribe how other people should think or act or feel, it feels like acting out all of the precepts in a positive way. It's a very strong practice, and it's one that I would really, really, really love to be better at personally. To respect the experience of others whilst holding our own when it's different is very hard. My personal journey in becoming a disabled woman has meant embracing this aspect of my experience in life, being proud to belong to such a beautiful, diverse community as the disability community. Language like person with a disability can sometimes feel like erasure to me, and words like special needs or differently abled, I feel are strongly rooted in discomfort around bodies that are different, and anxiety that human beings experience when faced with suffering and impermanence. That's very powerful. In my case, I don't believe that being disabled is inherently a bad thing. The worst thing about being disabled, frankly, and some of you will have heard me go on about this at great length, is other people and the ableism I experience when I'm out in the world. It doesn't mean that I or other folk who feel this way don't wish for less pain or less fatigue or less muscle cramps, better sleep, better digestion, being more flexible. It doesn't mean that, but it also doesn't mean that if there was a cure for my condition, that I wouldn't take it. But I'm not ashamed of my body. I'm not ashamed to be part of a community of people whose bodies don't fit a particular template. I love my body. I also love my mobility aids. My wheelchair for me is freedom. And sometimes I even relate to it as an extension of my body. But to other wheelchair users or other people who use aids, they might experience it in a very different way. My experience as a disabled woman is rich and diverse, and it's not two-dimensional. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it's not all lying in a hospital bed suffering. But what does that even have to do with the Dharma? So in the Lalita Vistra Sutta, before the Buddha's awakened and he's living in the palace, living this life of luxury, many of us will be really familiar with this story, will have heard it in other formats. He sees these four sights: old age, sickness, death, and a wandering renunciant. And we do talk about these sometimes in Triratna, but I feel like often we skip over the first three. And depending on how you read the sutra, you can take it literally. You can imagine that this man had never seen an old person, a sick person, or a dead body, or had come across those concepts before. But we could take it metaphorically and see that perhaps this was someone who'd never fully allowed themselves to take in the truth of these things. And I really experienced this difficulty to accept these truths in my daily life, both in myself and in other people. For example, when I first started getting ill a few years ago, I went to doctors and they couldn't give me an easy diagnosis. It wasn't straightforward. And I was shocked, frankly. I just wanted the problem to be fixed. I was sure that that was how modern medicine works. You went to the doctor, they gave you a pill, you got better. And it wasn't just that I didn't want to consider the possibility of life with sickness or disability or even my own death. It was that it felt impossible to me. Old age, sickness, and death are things that happen to other people. They do not happen to me. And it still is, honestly, hard to accept that my body is impermanent, that it's not impervious to decay or disability. And of course, this delightful delusion is part of the human condition, the very condition that the Buddha had a prescription for. I sometimes experience this view about old age, sickness, and death being escapable in other people. So due to pain, stiffness, fatigue, and other reasons, I predominantly use a wheelchair when I'm not at home or in the Buddhist center, and sometimes I do use them at home in the Buddhist center as well. And when I don't, I'm often using another aid like a crutch or crutches or a walking stick. So I'm therefore this visible beacon of disability and sickness for other people to see. And as I became disabled later in life, And at a certain stage, my disability was invisible to others. I can really see a difference in how people relate to me before and after. So this summer at Butterfield Festival, when Mike Trissara was cooking up this evening, I got a really strong taste of other people's views that disability must be curable. In the space of an hour, three complete strangers, different people, unrelated to one another, came up to me, asked me intrusive medical questions, and then proceeded to suggest various remedies or cures. And that was quite a lot in a short space of time, but this happens to me fairly frequently. And they couldn't understand that my body wasn't a social commodity for discussion, or that maybe this wasn't the best way to start a conversation, and that I had a right to medical privacy, and maybe I just wanted to eat my lunch in peace. But the main one that really struck me hard was that they couldn't accept there was no solution. I tried to explain to one of these women before I really got cross and lost my temper that I didn't actually necessarily see an inherent problem with me being disabled, and that I was generally happy with my body. Like most people, I had my grumbles. But she thought she'd misunderstood me and asked me to repeat myself multiple times. She couldn't believe that anyone could be happy and disabled. And she also couldn't believe that there was nothing to be done about it. It seems for many people that it is easier to believe that I must be doing something wrong than to believe that I live with a chronic condition for which there is no meaningful cure or treatment. Because if that is true, and a 30-year-old white middle-class woman in a country with free healthcare, if she can be disabled despite doing all of the right things, then this bad thing, disability, could happen to anybody at any time, and it could happen to you. So this is a universal truth. Buddhism tells us this over and over again, and we rarely accept it. I can't accept it a lot of the time, and I live with the stark reminders every day, and I have to work with that resistance, like when a carer turns up to help me shower and I don't want them to be there. But to continue to rail against this truth of impermanence is to rage against samsara itself. It is to continue to willfully stay in the realm of delusion. As a Buddhist, it is the spiritual equivalent of sticking one's fingers in one's ears, closing your eyes, going la, 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 and then claim to be practicing mindfulness of our surroundings. So these views are harmful to ourselves when we hold them in our minds, and that's what we'd call internalized ableism. But when we start offering up Pilates and keto diet plans and shamanic healing as a potential cure-all for every possible illness or condition out there, it starts to harm others too, and it's boring. I once sat in a restaurant with a friend who has a disability caused by a genetic condition, and I watched a well-meaning stranger try to make her understand that eating olive oil 3 times a day would cure her of her genetic condition. It's not that this stranger was being intentionally cruel. They really, really thought they were helping. They thought they were delivering to her news that was going to make my friend's life 1,000,000 times better. But sometimes our own views about bodies and delusions about impermanence, so things like all sickness can be cured, having a physically fit body is inherently better than having a disabled body, all disabled people must be unhappy all of the time, it leads to us behaving in strange ways that are near enemies of kindness. So this summer at Butterfield, a complete stranger, different stranger, I think, literally tried to get into the toilet with me to help me, despite me repeatedly telling her I didn't need any help, and then slamming the door in her face when she wouldn't leave me alone. She even tried to unlock the door from the outside. Now, this sounds really shocking, and I was shocked at the time, but I do get people try and help me quite frequently with things I don't need help with. I'm sure that she felt like her actions were motivated by kindness, but she didn't seem to be able to hear my no, even though it was being screamed from behind the locked door. Similarly, we often assume that people don't have access needs. Many disabilities are invisible, so we don't offer people help when they actually need it. It's very hard to listen to someone when we're holding so tightly to our own views, and this is why it's so important to investigate what those views are, so we can start to let go of them and actually be helpful and be meaningfully kind. To offer cures in an unsolicited way to disabled or chronically ill people sometimes also erases their experience, and it's not in line with reality. Something that I think is really central to our Buddhist practice, this idea that we're trying to see the interconnectedness of all things and live in line with that. To say to someone, I believe that you are doing everything you can to support your health and well-being, and you are still sick, or just even not assuming that someone wants to be fixed and not trying to force your help on someone who doesn't want it, can be an act of radical compassion, an act of radical wisdom. Perhaps true kindness lies in listening to people's lived experience and accepting the difficult truth that suffering, death, and hopefully for most of us, old age are coming. And that a 30-year-old woman in a wheelchair doesn't mean that something's wrong with the world. So during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people's difficulty with accepting impermanence too. Many times I heard the phrase, it's only elderly or vulnerable or people with underlying health conditions or disabled people that are dying from coronavirus. And I think I'm ashamed to say that I probably said this once or twice myself. It was as though that somehow the deaths of these people were different to my own potential death, which of course is impossible, as we already know. It was as though I was somehow drawing a barrier between myself and them, between myself and impermanence, a way to psychologically contain the fear and threat of my own mortality. And I saw that in other people as well. But at any moment, any one of us could become disabled by sickness or injury. An underlying genetic condition could be triggered, you could be hit by a bus. And most of us will become disabled through old age. This isn't only a problem as Buddhists because of the delusion and aversion to impermanence. It also suggests that disabled lives are worth less than the lives of people who aren't disabled. And this is the root of all ableism. So this is the practice of discriminating against people on the basis of ability or disability. It's the foundation on which historical and modern genocide of disabled communities has happened and continues to happen. The constant human need to compare and assign value to human life based on arbitrary things like productivity or one's ability to go to the toilet independently is staggering. And I see it in myself. We know this human birth is precious. It's this amazing opportunity for us to awaken. So why are we deciding that some of those opportunities are more important than others? Being alive in this body right now, as a disabled woman, awakening is possible. And if I was able-bodied, awakening would also be possible. But these ideas can seem a bit conceptual or vague. And if they're quite common and quite human, and as we know, most of us hold them to some extent, and if we're probably doing it all of the time, why does it matter so much? I mean, discrimination is a concept and disabled people are protected legally in this country. So you might be asking yourself, well, shouldn't I be focusing on my meditation practice or a really interesting aspect of Tantra? Or isn't just trying to be kind good enough? So those all sound like very reasonable thoughts, and they're thoughts that sometimes I have had. And honestly, I don't think it is quite enough. During the pandemic, for example, doctors working in COVID units were given guidance to choose who's prioritized to get a ventilator if they ran out of ventilators. Now, honestly, if you're the person writing the policy for that hospital, that must have been so traumatic. It must have been really horrible to be sitting there writing a document to give doctors guidance on which categories of people should live and which should die. I have profound respect and compassion for those people. And most of the time, these documents said that we should try to prioritize decisions that will save the most lives possible. And while that's ethically complex in and of itself, I understand it. I understand that, that as a doctor, you're trying to do as little harm as possible. However, in some areas of the country, these documents said that if someone was disabled, even if their disability didn't affect their chances of surviving coronavirus, or it didn't affect their overall life expectancy, that individual should be given less priority. To deny someone medical care on this basis is, in my opinion, is in direct opposition to the first precept. This wrong view, this sounds very extreme. So a lot of people, when I told my friends about this, were absolutely horrified. But this can be seen throughout culture and history. The human need to compare, to evaluate, to judge, it's this strong human need for delusion that keeps us in samsara, that is counter to Buddhist ethics, comes up again and again. From Alexander Graham Bell's work to eradicate the deaf community and deaf language and culture, the forced sterilization of disabled women, which is happening as we speak in this very moment, the Nazis' initial experiments on disabled people in the gas chambers, which they then took as a template for other groups. This idea that disabled lives are worth less is dangerous. And it's not just dangerous to the disabled community. And I think as Buddhists, we should be taking that very seriously. So there are two main prevailing academic views about disability, which we could discuss all night, and we won't because we have much more important things to discuss. But they can tell us a little bit about how we might think about these issues as Buddhists. So the first is this medical model, this idea, which we've already seen, that suggests disability is in the body and the body needs to be fixed, and that's how disability works. And the second is that it's the social model. So it sort of opposes this and says that although someone with a disabled body has a different body, their disability is not created by their body, it's created by society, it's created by architecture, it's created by structures, by people's views, by practices, by social cultures and customs, by language. Now, as a Buddhist, I think about this a little bit differently. And I think that because everything is the result of complex conditioning, things arise only in dependence upon conditions. And I think, therefore, both of these are very valid and important components in creating disability. Even if the world was as accessible as possible, I would still experience pain and fatigue. The difference in my body would still be there, and sometimes it sucks, and sometimes it's great. But as a Buddhist, I understand I can't control most of these factors. They tell me how these things come into being, but I can't go around changing all of our social structures, cultures, customs, the architecture of every building in the world. I can work on my own views, treating myself with kindness and treating others with kindness when I fall short in my own spiritual aspirations and when I see others doing the same. And I can love my body, for it's only with this body that enlightenment is possible. It's very unlikely I'm going to get another one in this lifetime. I can influence my friends and the people around me. I can try to ask myself questions about what I really believe and about how I want to practice the Dharma and live my life. And I can try to hold less tightly to views and opinions about disability and bodies. So we can't possibly cover or represent every issue relating to disability here tonight. We can't hope to do justice to the complexity of the issue in 90 minutes, honestly, especially when you start considering intersectionality. And we aren't, as Buddhists, going to get it right all of the time, even if you read every book on disability there was. And honestly, I'm not even sure there is such a thing as getting it right all of the time. And if there was, I'm definitely not doing it. I'm not sitting here as a model of how to get it right. Please don't think that. But I do suppose as Buddhists, most of us are pretty committed to trying to become more aware, becoming kinder, living more harmoniously with those around us. And I really believe that combating internalized ableist views and externalized and external ableism in our structures, in our conversations with friends, in the way that we do things as Buddhists, I really think that's a radical spiritual practice that takes real courage. And it's one that cultivates both wisdom and metta for all of us. It's a template to help us deepen our practice of the precepts. So I've talked quite a lot now. And what I really love to do is for you to hear from some other people who are also disabled and might have very different views and experiences to mine. Because as I've said, disabled people are not a monolith.
Before I start, actually, the shrine thing just really struck me then. And I was on the Sangha retreat, and there was a shrine at the side, a small shrine that was more accessible. I didn't even notice it, actually. So it took me a couple of nights before I caught on. But I didn't want to use it. And it was extremely painful to get down, and worrying whether I'd get up. But I did want the same experience as everybody else. And that did actually mean a lot to me. So that really resonated with me then. So I'm Jo. A bit of background information. I've got some notes which I've typed out beautifully and then just written loads of stuff over. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to say from it. There are lots, there's lots about myself. There's lots of things I do. As a person, like everybody, I've got lots of different roles. I'm a wife, a mother, grandmother, volunteer. I'm a Green Party activist. I'm a Buddhist, I'm a GFR Mitra, and lots of different things. And I'm also disabled. So this talk, again, is my personal lived experience as a disabled person. And I wasn't born disabled, and I was very healthy. And it's only really been this last 5 years that things changed for me. I did develop psoriatic arthritis in my 30s, and so I had quite a bit of pain in my hands and feet from that, and a lot of fatigue. But I really pretty much ignored it as much as I could. I continued to work. I can remember writing notes, and it was extremely painful. And I was going for a post as a sister. And I didn't want to, I was struggling on the night, and I told somebody about it. I said, well, don't let them know, because I was really concerned that it had stopped me from being able to move up the ladder. And that's how I've really dealt with health problems, is ignoring them and pushing them away. So in my mid-40s, I started to develop osteoarthritis in my knees, in my right hip. And that just continued to get worse. And then I had a very bad fall and broke my right humerus, which is plated, and have some nerve damage in that arm. So I do have limited use of this right arm. And I wasn't developing some of the abilities that I should, and then they did some more tests, and they found I have spondylosis and kyphosis, which is degenerative condition in my spine, affecting my neck and the base of my spine, and it causes me a lot of pain. And I take a lot of medication, a lot of pain relief, and that really does help. It helps me be more comfortable, and it helps me mobilise. but I am very, very often in quite a lot of pain. And interestingly, doing this talk has been very helpful, because even though I'm disabled, I try not to think about it really, and I've tried to push it away. And it's made me have a really good look at myself and have a really good look at my own experience. So I'm grateful for Vicky asking me to do this. I think the reluctance to acknowledge the disability is really a matter of ego, in a sense. And I don't feel bad about that now, because I see it is a wrong view, this idea that I'm solid and unchanging. I only have to look in the mirror to see that I don't look like I did when I was 20. And I believe I may be going grey as well. So the fact that my body has changed and continues to change is not something I should be surprised about. In fact, as everybody has said, the Buddha teaches that we are all subject to change, old age, sickness and death. And I think I'm in good company with a lot of other people who continue to try and push that away as well, to the back of their mind. And when I first came here, I really had quite low self-esteem. I'd been a nurse, I'd lost my job. My entire worth as a person was what I could do and what I could give. And when I came here, I found that there was another way of being, another way of feeling about myself. And I can't remember who he was, and it was early on. I was on a Sangha night, and then I heard somebody quote Sangharajita, saying, "You don't have to justify your existence by being useful. You yourself are the justification for your existence." And the man was talking to me. I felt this really was a message to me. Just as a human being, it didn't matter whether my body was working as well or in the same way as anybody else. And it seemed a really revolutionary way of looking at people. And that has been my experience in the Sangha, the kindness and compassion of other people. And I was fortunate enough to attend a breathworks not long after I started coming. I found that incredibly helpful. And for me, the journey is about treating myself, looking at myself with the same kindness as I would look at somebody else who had some sort of suffering. So I do, to some extent, see through the wrong views, and I think there's some wisdom and some spiritual progress for me. And this is available to me through my practice and devotion to the three jewels. So practically, what I can do for myself really is metta, self-metta, and my meditation practice as well, getting out of the head and into the body, and not trying to push away the pain. That's been a big thing. I can't push the pain away or deny it. But why not bring it into my meditation practice? Let it be there. And in that way, when I'm doing that, I'm actually accepting to some extent that's how I am, and that it's okay. I'm not going to get better. Really, for me, it's about accepting this is just who I am now, and it's okay to be like that. So what practical help could you do for me? Well, there's one thing that often if we're walking, I just feel I've got to catch up with everybody. And I try and walk faster, and it does cause me some pain. I mean, I do find that when I've been out, like I've come to tonight, tomorrow, it might be very difficult to get out of bed. It does wipe me out. So if I'm racing after people, that's quite difficult. And also I can't hear the conversation in front, and I do feel a bit excluded. And I know that's not deliberate by anybody. And yes, I'm very grateful if you put my chair away for me. And the other thing is a big thing that I need to be more direct. And this has been good, listening to other people, listening to their experience. I do have a voice, and I can use it. And it's feeling empowered to say, I don't feel included in that way. Is there something you can do for me? So I'm working on that quite slowly. The one thing I wanted to say at the end really is a line from the Four Reminders Puja. This human birth is precious, an opportunity to awaken. And this is now my work. I don't go to work, but this is actually the Buddhist's work, is moving towards enlightenment, awakening, seeing what we can give each other. So lastly, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity really to explore what this means for me. I'll swap my glasses before I move, otherwise I'll fall over.
Can you hear me okay on Zoom? So we might run over by a couple of minutes. Would that be okay? If anybody needs to leave, just slip out. So the last person who is going to speak for tonight is Kay. So Kay uses those pronouns. And it used to be a really prominent figure around the centre. He's speaking around the for several years. But unfortunately, they live in Stafford, and it's very difficult to get here because of the disability. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say tonight. They're zooming in.
I think I'm unmuted now. Hi, everyone. First, I just want to say what an absolute pleasure it is to be with everyone, and what a privilege it's been to listen to other people and their experience. So I know many of you may not have seen me because I haven't physically been at the centre for a while, but it's also really nice to see some familiar faces. So what has disability got to do with the Dharma? Well, there's so much that I could say about being Buddhist and having disabilities, but I'm hoping to just touch on a few things tonight because I'm sure you'd all like to go home at some point. I have so much wrong with me that my girlfriend calls me mouldy. That's our little joke between us, but just so you understand more, I have a mix of physical conditions, so that impacts my mobility and my level of pain. So I'm usually knocking about on my crutches, and in recent years been more reliant on using a wheelchair. I have asthma too, and it can get very bad very quickly, and it's very unpredictable. And then just for good measure, I also have complex post-traumatic stress disorder and bulimia, so it's safe to say I experience a fair bit of mental suffering too. I've spent a lot of time in hospital, which means that I've been away from the physical aspects of the Sangha, but I've always been held very kindly, and I'm eternally grateful for my friends and teachers here. I learned very early on that you can't leave parts of yourself at the door with Buddhism. So I always practice wholly and I throw myself in wholeheartedly, or I like to think I do. I can't leave my disabilities at the door, and nor should I have to, because what I know is that it's as much part of my practice as anything else. I used to think that the challenges that came from my disabilities made me less of a Buddhist, but actually how I choose to live my life is my practice. How do I respond when I'm in pain, when I can't do something like going on retreat, when I can't meditate, when I can't go up to the shrine, what responds in me, what drives my faith and understanding of the Dharma. If I had to rename this talk, then I'd call it Don't Throw Darts. Anybody who's ever spent any time around me will know that I bang on a lot about the first and second darts of suffering. And it's really central to my practice. I suffer physically, psychologically, and that will happen no matter how much I fight it. Pain is the price of living. I have to radically accept dukkha. I don't have to like it, but I do have to accept it. The existential suffering, though, that's not necessary. That's the second dart of suffering. And that's what I work with every day in my practice. The stories and the not firing off the whys. Oh, poor me, look at how much this hurts. What have I done to deserve this? All the emotions, the sadness, the anger. We're all familiar with this prapancha, I'm sure. My second dart tells me that I'm not enough, that I could never get ordained, that it's my fault, that if I just did this or that, then things would be better. The second dart brings aversion, and I would do anything to avoid pain. So all those behaviours that break the precepts suddenly are at my disposal. So I have to consciously choose not to fire the second dart, and this is why there's no separating my disabilities from the Dharma. So I came to Buddhism in 2011, and my health was actually much better back then, but obviously it's deteriorated over the years. If you would have told me then that now I would have disabilities that would stop me working and affecting my day-to-day living, I probably wouldn't have believed you, because I felt I had it all. I had my degree, I had my dream job, I was in love with the person who I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I had great friends, I'd found Buddhism and it felt like home, so I remember that feeling of euphoria. I was making a difference in the world, but I was due a lesson in impermanence. And who thought that in losing that I could also gain so much? So my health challenges mean that I come up close and personal with the precepts. So I have a particularly intimate relationship with the harm precept. This is most alive in my practice when I'm unwell mentally. I mentioned earlier that I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And what that really means is that I've experienced lots of traumatic things over my life and that it still affects me. So my mood, my self-esteem, my ability to be present and grounded, dissociating, so staying in the body, sometimes seeing or hearing things that other people aren't. And I'm sure in telling you this that it seems obvious the ways in which that my mental health is a disability for me. In deep distress, I've hurt myself and I've come close to taking my own life. So the harm precept has been fundamental to my practice. I say this not to make people feel uncomfortable, not for shock value. I just wanted to be open about how Buddhism has changed my life, but also not paint a rosy picture, because there have been many times where I've felt disconnected and at odds with my faith and practice. I'm wanting to share, though, that there is a way to navigate the Dharma and practice, even in extreme adversity. The Dharma has been the path away from suffering towards enlightenment and all the wonders that this brings. I think people around me are more distressed by my disabilities than me. And I guess this is in part due to the fact that I hold up a mirror to people realising that sickness, old age, death do really exist, and then having to face that, just as the Buddha did. Because I do this on a daily basis, I'm well versed in it. But I would be very rich, very, very rich, if I was paid for every time someone suggested that I do yoga or eat a particular health food or insert other random health advice here. I wish it was this easy, but it's scary for people to see and accept that someone is doing everything in their power, yet they are still so sick. It makes them question themselves and their relationship with the Dharma. I wanted to share a little bit with you about a period of practice that was particularly difficult. I'd been meditating for a while, but suddenly I was starting to get traumatic memories, turning up whenever I was sitting on the cushion. And my first response was to work with it and to do the whole sitting with rather than pushing away. But this just turned out to be a form of torture. I got frustrated and I was sad that such an important part of my practice was so debilitating. It made me feel like a failure as a Buddhist. This is where everything I'd learned about metta came in, because I knew instinctively that the answer was compassion and not hate. I'm not saying it was easy, but it's definitely worth it. I tried lots of things to help, things like keeping my eyes open, but that just felt like putting a sticking plaster over a pierced artery. And after seeking lots of advice, I decided to stop meditating for a while. This was huge for me because of the stories that I was telling myself, this story about being a failed Buddhist. I don't actually remember how I started to meditate again, but I do feel like there wasn't this big kind of revelation or kind of event that made me practice again. I just found that it got easier. But I particularly found listening to mantras helpful. So when I wasn't able to meditate, it wasn't uncommon for me to spend hours sitting in the arms of Avalokiteshvara. What I want to get across was that I put as much faith and devotion into listening to the mantras as I ever did meditating. And it's so important to know that if there are barriers to parts of your practice, that there are always ways to work with the Dharma. So maybe you're struggling, or maybe one of your friends in the Sangha is. There has to be hope. There has to be a way that we can work with people so that they can have their relationship with the Dharma. It's never hopeless. I spent 14 months living in a hospital in a therapeutic community. And because I was in York, there wasn't a Triratna group at the time. So it meant that I had to leave my study group. And I was absolutely devastated. So my study was so important to me that giving it up felt like losing a limb. But I was in this situation and I had to accept that that's how things were, even though it wasn't as I wanted things to be. But even though I wasn't formally studying, I carried on learning. So my curiosity, my commitment to the Dharma never wavered. There was this other way that I adapted my practice to fit with my life. And sometimes that was a really lonely experience, figuring out how to have this relationship with the Dharma. I think people find it easier to be supportive of my physical disabilities than my mental health. When I'm on crutches, people can help, hold doors, carry my bags, bring me food, making the shrine more accessible, having accessible toilets and rooms. But that's not the case with mental health. I think mental health is actually really scary for many people. And I think that when people start practicing and experiencing mental distress, whether they're a beginner or experienced, the pull is to not do those things and to not do the things that are difficult in practice. And I think that's probably a very natural response that comes from fear and worry and genuine care. So wanting the best for people, wanting people to be well, free from suffering, and to not be in crisis. But there's a really important point. At the same time, it's really important that as a Sangha and a community, we don't unintentionally disconnect people from Buddhism, because the chances are that's already happening in their personal practice. I've got so much more that I could say, but we've had a whistle-stop tour of what Kay thinks of disabilities and the Dharma, some teachings, some barriers and solutions, and finally some things for us to consider as a Sangha about how we care for each other, each and every one of us. it was a real challenge to cut things down and pick what to say. So I do hope that there's something that you can take away from what I've said this evening. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kay. I just want to say a really big thank you, especially to our 3 speakers tonight, because it's really scary to stand up here or sit down at home or wherever you are and be so vulnerable and open about a part of your experience, which can be very painful at times. And there were a number of people who disabled members of our Sangha who said that they didn't feel like they could participate tonight because it was too raw and painful. So a really big thank you to those people who have contributed tonight. And I hope we hold in our hearts those who didn't feel able to be here. And thank you so much to Mike Sara for making this happen. I'm so grateful he gave us the chance to speak, and to everybody for turning up in person and on Zoom.